Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 94 of the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks again for tuning back into the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 94. Today we have a guest in Bronson Strickland, who is the director of MSU's Mississippi State University's Deer Lab, and I've got Bronson on to talk about what's turning out to be a not fun subject. I don't know that it ever was, and that subject is chronic wasting disease. As I sat here this afternoon going through the edit, it was, I don't want to over exaggerate how tough it was to edit the episode. I didn't take anything out that shouldn't have been taken out, but it was almost excruciating at points going through it, just because it's become critical mass here in Wisconsin. It's a big deal, and how to handle it and how it's been handled in the past and all of those things and the political ramifications of this and that are just, it makes it a really tough subject. So as you listen to this, I hope that you listen with an open mind, and I hope you listen to gain some knowledge about the disease itself, not to form an opinion on whether or not we should supplemental feed, whether or not we should bait, or any of those things. I don't know that we know absolutely enough information to make a concrete decision exactly one way or another about many of the issues. Some of them we do, and I'll let you all make up your own minds about that. But I don't know that there's enough information out there. What I did do is try to give you a unbiased opinion and some factual information that maybe helps you to develop an opinion, an educated opinion on chronic wasting disease, what it's going to do to the deer herd moving forward, and what you can do to, be a positive influence within our hunting community. And I think that's important. So often we get tied up in, all these political debates that happen on social media and things like that. And I just want to remind everybody that what's really most important here is our sport and the resource. And we owe it to both to do the right thing. So with that, I'm going to start the show and hope that I've done the right thing. In this is going to be a 2-part show, just because it's a big subject, and it may become a 10-part show. Who knows? But with that, I'm just going to get Bronson on the air here, and we're going to have our conversation about chronic wasting disease. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Bronson Strickland. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Today, I have a guest that is a return guest on the show. He's been on a couple different times, and that guest is Mr. Bronson Strickland from MSU's Deer Lab. How's it going, Bronson?
Everything's going great, Jason. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. We're having you on the show today to talk about CWD, but before we get into that, how did your season go this year?
Well, you got to keep in mind, Jason, we're still in the midst of it down here. In Mississippi, we don't close until January 31st.
Okay.
Yeah, believe it or not, in some places in Mississippi, the rut is still going strong and can exist until the end of January. So we typically start later, Jason, but we end later.
Okay.
Down here. Yeah.
So similar to, I guess I've got some folks that I know in Alabama that are chasing deer yet, and they're talking about the rut just getting into full swing in parts of Alabama.
That's right.
That is. Okay.
That's right.
Interesting.
So I've got a big hunt planned next week, actually, and that will probably be it for me. So I've got to rally here towards the end and get a few more in the freezer, and then I'll be set for 2019.
Well, we'll be pulling for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's been an odd year for weather, has it not, for you?
Oh, the biggest deal here, yeah, it's been above average temperatures, but in my neck of the woods, it's just been rain. There's just so much water everywhere. And it really affected a lot of us. Well, on the research side, on some things we were doing, it really messed up our plans for some food plot research we had planned. And so that got postponed for a while. But that's generally been the biggest thing. A little warmer than average and certainly way above average in terms of rainfall.
Horribly warm, horribly wet to start the season. Like opening weekend, which would have been right around the 15th of September. Like I think I bought 3 thermocells off of Amazon like 4 days before the season, and I just, because you could not go outside without the mosquitoes trying to carry you away. There were so many, like nothing I'd ever seen. Like I physically got sick. I was moving at the time, and I physically got sick putting the trailer on the trailer hitch from all the mosquito bites I got on my legs. It was just like, ugh, it was horrible.
Oh my! Yeah.
And then the late October, it just got cold. And I think that I saw sometime here a while ago on the news that for November and December, most of November and some of December, the average temperature was on average, to quote you, on the average, it was 13 degrees lower than the normal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
that's significant.
Like I was down in Iowa. I had a hunt in Iowa that was just a train wreck. I hunted in snow there and 18 degrees. And it wasn't a train wreck because of that. It was a train wreck because Todd's property basically got pretty well wiped out by EHD. And it was tough hunting. So no one goes to Iowa with the expectation of seeing nothing. It was tough because I had a 500-acre lease that I just had started this year and sort of left that as a learning year, and it was a tough year for that. But speaking of my 500-acre lease, let me just give you a little background on why I'm so curious about CWD. First of all, it's Wisconsin. And I don't think anybody's a stranger to the fact that it's been a political thing here in this state for some time, and there's been a lot of controversy around it. And we can talk about some of that later. I've got a whole page of stuff that I want to talk about. But first of all, I just want to state that my hope in doing this show is that you're able to help us give everyone a base level understanding, I guess, of what CWD is, and what it could do to the deer herd, and how we all can become better informed. A lot of people think that they're informed and, think that they've done their research. And I have a good friend who says, if you read it sitting on the toilet, it's not research, it's reading. And
that's good.
And he's right. It isn't research; it's reading, but still, becoming educated. But how we can become better informed, and come to a decision. And I'm not so sure that we need to make a decision, but if you could, let me just throw a question at you, and make sure that I'm understanding correctly based on the reading that I have done. And that's is it called pathogenesis?
Yes, I believe so.
Basically the manner in which the disease develops, its origin, development, the chain of events essentially that leads up to the disease. Is there any concrete information on how these prions do what they do?
Ooh, that is that's a tough one, Jason, and let me provide a qualifier here.
Okay.
I'm a deer biologist in terms of the biology and ecology and management. That's my expertise, and the terminology and that you're describing and how this disease works is really, really complicated. And so I'm probably in a position much like you, and that I have been, jumped in with both feet for especially the last year, since Mississippi is now a CWD state, and really trying to understand this better. And yeah, it is really, really complicated. The problem I'm also having, Jason, is the misinformation by certain people and certain organizations that have a really, really big voice that are, I think, telling hunters this really isn't a big deal. And everything that I can glean and the conferences that I go to, and luckily I'm in a position where I can rub shoulders and talk to the experts in the nation that's been working on this for 2 to 3 decades. This is a big deal, and it's something we should be very concerned about, and something we as hunters should be doing everything we can in our power to not get the disease in your area, and then help in any way we can to slow the spread. What's really different about this disease, even though some people don't call it a disease, which I've seen on social media, some people call it a condition, and this is absolutely a disease, even though it's not spread by a virus or a bacteria. It is a disease that is 100% fatal. So once an animal, a deer, gets this, it is going to die. Now, it could die of something else beforehand. It could die of a car collision. It could die from a hunter. But if the animal lives long enough, it is going to die of this disease. And, this whole thing, this entity we're talking about, a prion or a prion, depending on where you're from, is just really, really different. And probably the most research that's ever been done that people would relate to, people are probably most familiar with mad cow disease. So this is just the deer version of mad cow disease. And, I would never think someone that's managing livestock would not think that mad cow disease was not a disease. I don't think they would view that as a condition. They would view it as a disease that is going to kill the animals in their herd. And then the sheep version of it is scrapie. Scrapie, that has been identified for a very, very long time. And it's the one that most closely resembles CWD in cervids or in the deer family, because congratulations to the deer version of this, it is contagious. So scrapie in sheep and CWD in deer is the contagious form of this disease, whereas in cows and some other animals, it's not contagious. So that's kind of a little bit of a background with that, Jason. In terms of how it's transmitted, what best we can tell is that it's transmitted from animal to animal. When an animal becomes what we call clinical, especially when they become clinical, meaning the disease is really taking its toll on the animal, they begin shedding these prions, most notably in the saliva and urine and feces. And, that is our most reasonable hypothesis as to, how it becomes contagious. So spread from animal to animal. And then, of course, if you're in a situation where deer are concentrated, if you're supplementally feeding or things like that, you are going to increase the likelihood or probability, if an animal has been infected, that it's going to spread it on to other animals, to other deer. I hope I kind of hit the target there. That was, I rambled a little bit, but that's a little bit of a background.
Well, no, you didn't ramble at all. I guess that was my next question is, going over to the routes of transmission, and it's spread from animal to animal by bodily fluid, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So do we know that as a fact?
I would put that in the fact category. There are so many cases where there's just really not any other explanation. For example, you'll see, Jason, when the disease is found in a facility, a deer pen, an enclosure, and things like that, you will see the prevalence rate a lot higher than a free-ranging scenario. So that certainly leads you to believe that it is contagious, and because of the confinement and the animal husbandry of eating and drinking, out of the same sources, that is how it is being spread.
So it's I hate to put you on the spot, but that's an assumption. If we're being, transparent, that's an assumption. There is no actual study that's been done that can say, the saliva had the prion in it, and that prion then was given to the other deer through the saliva transfer, that kind of thing?
I'm not aware of that, Jason, but let me disentangle that. So, yes, I believe, I'm 99.99% positive on this. The infectious prions have been identified in the saliva, in the urine, in feces, of course, in animal tissue, the nervous system, the lymphatic system, things like that. And I guess it just kind of stands to reason then that if an infectious prion is in that saliva, or if a doe or bucks, etc., have nose-to-nose contact, swapping bodily fluid, things like that, that is a very reasonable route of transmission.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's where a lot of these conspiracy theories and things like that come up, and we'll cover that in just a little bit. Is that folks are saying, well, there's no, there's maybe no hard and fast evidence that suggests one thing or the other, but at some point you have to use common sense, and I think that's what I'm hearing you say. Common sense would dictate that on the average, if you have this result, you can expect it happened this way, right?
Yeah, so you could say common sense. Maybe a little stronger word I would use is logic, and then I would maybe even say scientists can't come up with an alternative explanation. The way we try to explain it is there are things that we can control and there's things that we can't control. The things that we can control are concentrating animals. And the single best example would be supplemental feeding or baiting. Let's even not say supplemental feeding. Concentrating deer over a pile of bait to facilitate harvest. That is something you can control. On the other hand, another way the disease can be spread is through yearling buck dispersal. That's really nothing we control. That is a natural phenomenon that is going to happen a majority of the times. A yearling buck is going to leave his natal range, where his mom and sibling is at, and go out on his own. And unfortunately, if that yearling buck is infected, he could carry the infectious prions to a new location. But that's really out of our control. The only way you could control that is not to have deer. And, that we really don't want to get to that point. So let's try to focus on the things that we can control. One step further, Jason, would be let's not transport live deer from point A to point B. And so, again, it's only logical when you look at a map of the spread of CWD, and a lot of these enclosures, have come up CWD positive. It's just really logical that through the transport of animals in that system, and unbeknownst to them, let me say this too, Jason. There's something I see on social media a lot where a lot of people want to blame the deer breeding industry, or they want to blame that just because you have a fence up, you are facilitating CWD, and that's not the case at all. If you think about someone that had either for recreation or financially, if they had some type of breeding facility, the last thing in the world they would want would be a deadly disease in that captive herd.
Right.
but it's literally, so it's not that they would cause the disease. Confining the animal doesn't cause the disease. It's just the unfortunate circumstance of when that system of you have some of these animals have the disease, and it's very difficult. We're only now getting to where we can have live animal tests. For the longest time, there was no live animal tests. And so unbeknownst to you, not you, Jason, but unbeknownst to that person, they're moving a potentially diseased animal from point A to point B, and now the disease pops up in another breeding facility. And so I've seen that a lot, to where I think some hunting groups and enthusiast groups have lashed out, thinking that the general hunting public is pointing their finger and blaming the deer farming or the deer breeding industry, that they caused this disease. And I don't think that's the case at all. They didn't cause it, but potentially, and unbeknownst to them, possibly facilitated the spread.
Arguably, that's a reasonable conclusion. What about, I took the deer home that I shot this year, and I got rid of the bones in the back 40, and they're laying on the ground. Common sense tells me that they're going to if they're CWD positive, they're going to have the CWD, the prion in them that is going to go into the soil. Is that how it is? Is it leached down into the soil then from the bones, the basically the degradation of the bones? Does it get into the soil that way, or how does that all work?
I'll tell you what, Jason, that is, I've been having to give a lot of seminars over the past 10 months or so on this, and I really try to distinguish with people what is possible and what is probable. And laboratory studies have determined that what you described is certainly possible. That literally has been demonstrated in a laboratory, where an infectious prion can be in the soil, and that prion can literally be uptaken by a plant and be in the tissue of a plant. So that's been proven. That's a fact. What we don't know at this point is how likely is that in a normal situation with normal deer densities. And here's some new information that literally about a month ago came to light in some of the scholarly journals, is that there's variation in different soils. So supposedly really clay soils bind the prions and possibly could keep them from being uptaken. And most recently, there was a study, I want to say it was out of British Columbia, that demonstrated some of the different types of organic matter in the soil. Those different types of acids in that organic matter can actually denature the prion. In other words, render it useless, break it down. And so those are really big questions that are going to have a really big impact that we just don't have a good handle on yet.
So we don't know is the short answer. We don't know.
We don't know, but those are burning questions that we hope to know in the future.
And these studies that you're talking about, that's one thing that always sort of intrigues me, because I've read about studies, and I'm not the sharpest guy in the world, but one study that I read about was them being the researchers, taking 10 mineral sites where the deer had been fed minerals or given minerals, and they found the CWD prion in the soil at those mineral sites in 9 out of 10 of the sites. So one could I guess one could surmise that, okay, well, if that's the case, then mineral sites are bad because they're going to have a higher likelihood of having that CWD prion. My only question in that study was, how many sites did we test in that study that weren't mineral sites? So that, I mean, is there any validity to my question? Should a study like that have included things like an alfalfa field or what, fill in the blank where deer are going to concentrate?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And, I don't want to cast too much judgment on that study as a researcher, because there's always time limitations. There could be monetary limitations, funding and things like that. But I think you're right, Jason, is that if you were to do a more complete, plenty of funding, plenty of time, resources, et cetera, is you would probably want to somehow randomly sample the landscape at large, and look at how often are you finding and identifying the prions in the landscape in general. And then you would want to see at mineral licks, at food plots, maybe around supplemental feeder, maybe at places where deer had been baited, then sample to see if the prevalence rate was a lot higher or the concentration of prions was a lot higher. That would be a better way to approach it. That would be a more complete way to approach it. So
let me ask you this. When people are doing their research or reading, as my fellow team member Clint McCoy would say, it's not research, buddy, it's reading. What should we be careful of in reading? Like I hear the term peer-reviewed study. Well, to me, that sounds like a whole bunch of your peers, Bronson's peers, looked at the work that he did and agreed that the conclusion that he came to was realistic and reasonable. Is that in layman's terms what a peer-reviewed study is?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this may be more detailed than you want, but I guess I would start by saying peer review isn't perfect, right. But right now it's probably the best thing we have. And typically, Jason, the better the journal, and I know your listeners probably don't know what are the best journals or not, but when you get a paper into a really top tier journal, I mean, those people put it through the ringer. And they look at your methodology. They want to see what conclusions you arrived at. They want to review your analytical techniques. And then they want to make sure that your explanation and discussion of the results are appropriate. And if you are going out on a limb, and the term we would say, is extrapolating beyond the data, If we are saying things or recommending things that the data don't support, they are very quick to rein you back in. Also, the peer review process is blind in that when I submit a paper to the journal of XYZ, I have no idea who those reviewers are. It's anonymous. And so usually I would say the process works pretty well. Now, there's always going to be a case. There's always somebody out there with an axe to grind. There may be a situation where someone was asked to be a reviewer that really wasn't qualified to be a reviewer. All those little things can happen, but I would say, on the average, the system works pretty well.
Right. Yeah, it's not perfect. I get that. I just, I always say follow the money, and it seems like more often than not, if you want a result, I mean, if it's not peer reviewed, the money that allowed the study to take place is probably going to dictate the result, in my opinion. And you don't even have to comment on that, but I think that's again common sense. And so I hear the term peer reviewed study thrown around a lot, and you answered one of my questions, and I think it's a logical question. Well, what if you just asked 5 of your peers that aren't going to want to make you look like an idiot, and they're just going to agree with you, but you answered how that process goes. Is there a particular publication that not as I'm not going to say is more reputable, but is there a particular publication that would be more geared towards deer than another, or not necessarily?
I wouldn't say necessarily relative to deer. I would say relative to wildlife in general.
Okay.
So there's a lot, and I'll just throw some names out there. For example, we have a journal called the Journal of Wildlife Management. And so that is literally for my professional organization of the Wildlife Society, which says I'm a wildlife biologist. That is our professional journal. Another one might be the Journal of Mammalogy. And so they specialize in all types of mammal research. And then when you get to things like CWD, there's several journals that focus on disease management, disease ecology. So when you get a topic like this involving a disease in a mammal or a deer, and it gets into one of those journals, it's been through a pretty rigorous process.
The basics of CWD are about as basic as the basics of rocket science. Well, it just so for the average person, where would you direct them to start being more educated with CWD? And I'm speaking from, a guy from Wisconsin. I'm in the area that I grew up in, and close to the area that I've hunted in and hunt in. It is a hotbed. I have heard rumors, and they're just that, rumors, that we're getting back somewhere north of 50% of the deer that have been tested are CWD positive. Now, if that's the case, I don't really know what that means. Here's what I do know. Yeah. I had 5 friends that had their deer tested. All 5 of those deer came back positive. None of my friends that had their deer tested didn't come back positive, or didn't come back negative. They were all positive, but only 5 of them had them tested, and they were all in mature. So I'm going to say 3 and 4 year old or more deer. So, and they were all bucks. So I don't, everybody's like, well, wow, what does that mean? What does that mean? That means the disease is growing, folks. It means exactly what, the professionals predicted is happening. Is there anything that we could have done to prevent that?
Well, let me answer your very first question of where can people go? Luckily, there's a website. It's kind of the gold standard for all of the available information, and it's updated all the time. And it's real simple. It's CWD info.org. CWD-info.org. And I mean, and it literally, like I was just looking, their map has been updated with Tennessee, which is our state number 26 after Mississippi being 25. So they put all the newest and relevant information up there. They have a drop-down menu for learning about the disease. They have a drop-down menu for hunters, and each one of those have FAQ sections and then different maps. And Jason, I was actually on the Wisconsin State Wildlife Agency's website probably about a week ago because last time you and I talked, it piqued my interest. And on their website, most recently, there's a lot of counties where the prevalence rate for bucks was approaching and even surpassed 40%. So it is spreading. Now, I will say this with your example about bucks is that over time, it's been shown that, a buck is going to be more likely to have the disease. So that's one factor. Number two, the longer that buck lives, the greater the likelihood he's going to get it. And then lastly, bucks with CWD are more likely to be hunter harvested. All that to say is if there was a target animal where you had the highest likelihood of, I'm just going to go out on the landscape and I'm going to kill a few deer that have the highest likelihood of having CWD, it'd be a mature buck. So in those same areas, Jason, when you look at the prevalence rate for does or for younger bucks, it's not as high. But that still in no way diminishes or negates the fact that the disease is growing in those counties in Wisconsin.
So we can probably say it's not rumor that 40% or higher are coming of the deer tested. I want to make sure everybody's clear. That's of the deer tested, 40% are coming back. In some cases, not all. Yeah. In some cases, 40% or higher are coming back positive. Okay, that answers that. I just need to look at my notes here, and I have some questions that'll come from Facebook here in just a second. But now you just mentioned bucks. Is it possible that, because let's just say hypothetically that 80% of the deer tested were bucks, okay? Is it possible then that this number that we're throwing out, this 40% number, isn't necessarily the number of the herd because you were testing way more bucks than does? Okay, so this isn't necessarily a scientific study or survey, right? Well, I guess I'm not sure how you design it or how you define it, rather, not design.
I guess you could look at it two ways. I think it's really, really good. I mean, I applaud Wisconsin for doing this and for testing. You would just have to keep in mind that. And Jason, if you go to their site, I was able to Google really easy, CWD information, Wisconsin State Wildlife Agency, et cetera.
I check it every day.
And okay, well, in a couple clicks, I could get to the maps where they've had testing over time, and you'll see the lines. It's broken down by. It'll be either mature bucks or bucks greater than 2 years of age. It'll be yearling bucks, and then often it'll be does and fawns or something like that. And on the average, or I should say most often, the greatest rate will be in bucks, older bucks, and then yearling bucks and does will be kind of similar, and fawns will be less than that. So a lot of that is from those bucks being more predisposed to having it, but then also it's the same way, Jason, when you only look at roadside. If you look at vehicle collisions, those deer probably, I think I could even use a stronger word than probably, but it's the same way with hunting. When a disease starts taking control of your brain, you probably become less wary. You don't have all your senses and your wits about you. And it's a lot easier for a hunter to kill you, and it's a lot easier for a car to hit you when you're crossing the road. So I think we just have to recognize it like that when you're sampling like that from deer that have already been killed, you have to realize that the disease itself may predispose them to being killed. Now, alternatively, if you were, to employ sharpshooters, hey, let's say we're going to get in a helicopter. Let's fly around in a helicopter, and you've got a gunner there, and the first deer you see, shoot it. Then you may, from that type of sample, have a lower prevalence rate. than what you had from hunter harvested bucks.
It does.
If that makes sense.
It does. It absolutely does.
But that number is still alarming. 40%, even qualifying that with what I just said, 40% is still high, really high.
Well, it is. I guess the way that I'm looking at it is it would stand to reason that if, these folks had their deer tested because they shot a trophy and they're just curious and they're, maybe more willing to do that with a trophy deer than they are with the doe that they shoot, is that going to skew the results? And I guess whether it does or doesn't, if 40% of the 4-year-old deer are infected with the disease, that's still a big number, I guess. So it really doesn't matter, right?
That's still a big number, right?
One thing that I want to make sure that people know, and maybe you can clarify this, because I think I know, but I think I know a lot of things and I don't, is I'm getting a lot of private messages on Facebook and then through the White Knuckle site about people saying, hey, I got my deer back and it tested positive or it tested negative, but they're saying my deer's only 2 years old and I've got the sheds from him for 2 years. So he's got to be a minimum of a 3-year-old, but I know his sheds are the first sheds I got are from him as a 2-year-old. So my question to you is, I heard you say when you were quoting the numbers out of Wisconsin that bucks 2.5 years or older, and I don't remember what you filled in after that, but it sounds to me like they're not distinguishing anything after 2.5 years old.
I don't remember, Jason. I'm sorry. I don't remember that, and I may be wrong. It may have been 3.5, but I thought I remember the bucks being classified as either yearling or 2.5 plus. But I'm relying on a week old memory here.
I get it. I'm right there with you. Where I was going with all that is, a lot of people are saying, well, they said my deer's only 2.5 years old in the test that they did, and Is there a more accurate way to get the age of a deer by sending its teeth into a lab and having them do something with their teeth versus whatever way the DNR's using, so that they're getting, the majority of these deer they're saying are 2.5 or 3.5 years old? Yeah,
it would really depend on time and resources. The one really good designation, Jason, about saying either one fawn, 1.5 or 2.5 plus, is that with tooth wear and replacement, you can make that assessment really, really quick. Someone that knows what they're doing with, my goodness, 99% accuracy. I can look at a jawbone and in about 5 seconds say fawn, yearling, 2.5 plus. If you really want to, if you need to and want to, which in a lot of management scenarios you do, especially if you're into, quality management, trophy management, things like that, and you want to know if he's 3.5, 4.5, or 5.5, you can estimate that with tooth wear and replacement. That's where you're looking at the wear part of tooth wear and replacement. Or you can pull one of the teeth and send it to a lab, and they will use a technique called cementum annuli, which would be akin to taking the core sample from a tree and counting the growth rings. And literally that's kind of what is done is the root of that tooth is cut in half, and they apply a stain to it, and they're able to examine that with a microscope and count the annuli, or the growth rings for the deer. That technique works far better up north where you're at than it does in the south. Here in the south, for a lot of different reasons, the annual rings are not as distinguishable. but up north where you're at, they would be. So I'm going to pull this just out of my back pocket, Jason, and I would venture to guess, depending on how the sampling is being done, is that the state agency may just say, hey, we just have to take a quick look at this, whether a biologist is at a check station or they're at a taxidermist or where people have dropped off deer, et cetera. The biologist can take a peek inside the mouth or extract the mandible and give it those age categories. It's a buck or a doe, and then is it a fawn? Is it a yearling? Is it 2.5 plus? And from the perspective of the disease ecology or their management implications, that may be all they need to do. In other words, they may not need to invest the time and money to pull, 10,000 or tens of thousands of deer teeth and have them sent to a laboratory.
So just for any of you listening in Wisconsin that are concerned that the DNR is telling you your deer is 2.5, what they're saying more likely is that it is 2.5 or better.
Very well could be.
And we don't know, I guess, but don't freak out about it. If you have the sheds and there's a reasonable amount of certainty that's the sheds from that deer, then I'd say you have more information than they do, and they did the best they could with that information. And that just leads me to a question that I was going to ask later, and it's already getting later, so I appreciate your time, Bronson. What's your opinion? I'm sort of putting you on the spot, but that's just what I do. What's your opinion on all these people that are saying, "Oh, it's a conspiracy by the state to get more money from insurance companies"? And God, if I've heard that once, I've heard it a million times. There is on the average, I would have to say, and I'm using your saying more often than not. On the average, I'm using it.
You've taken a liking to that.
I have. It's not even realistic to think that there's some sort of government conspiracy that's manufactured this disease. Is it? Well, there you have it. The first part of my interview with Bronson Strickland of MSU's Deer Lab will air the next episode, or part 2 of this episode, next week, and we'll finish up our discussion on CWD. In between here and there, I would love it if y'all could go over to the White Knuckle Facebook page or on YouTube, make a comment. And let us know what you thought or what questions you wanted answered that didn't get answered, things of that nature. I'd love to have some dialogue on this because I think it's going to be important going forward, whether you're in Wisconsin or Illinois or Iowa or wherever you are at. I think it's going to become important that we all begin to learn a little bit more about this disease than what we knew maybe when we woke up today. So, with that, I'll just have a couple closing remarks here real quick. If you could, please go on over to iTunes and give us a review. We could definitely use your review. The more reviews we get, the better we will become at doing the job that we do. And that's hopefully bringing you guys and gals a show that you can relate to and one that you're gleaning some knowledge from. So if you could do that, that would be great. If you don't listen to it on iTunes, go over to Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever it is that you get your content. Give us a review, and we would greatly appreciate it. With that, we want to thank our sponsor, Ozonics, for making this all possible. Without them, we could not put this on. So if you have a chance to support them, go over to their website, www.ozonicshunting.com. and check out what they have new for this year. As the year goes on, listen to our show for a WKP bundle, which is something we did last year, which was a huge success, and we will be doing it again this year. In the meantime, they're going to have some pretty killer deals on their website as well as at some of the shows. I know they're going to be here at Harrisburg in the next couple of weeks, and I'm not sure where they're at from there, but Ozonics will be at many of the different outdoor sporting events or outdoor sports shows here in the next 3 or 4 months. I also want to remind everyone that Mr. Todd Prignitz, will be out on the road. He's going to be all over the countryside doing his seminar, Ghost Bucks, at Harrisburg again here coming up, I believe, starting February the 2nd. Todd will be at Harrisburg doing seminars there, I believe, daily. As soon as we have a schedule for Todd, as soon as Harrisburg gets me one, I'll be putting that on our White Knuckle Facebook page and our Instagram page, and wherever it is that you can find us on social media, I'll try to make sure I put Todd's schedule on there. With that, I think I've rambled on enough. Again, please give us your comments and feedback on this show in particular, and I guess if you have comments on other shows, we'd love to hear those as well. That's all we got. Jason out.